So before our keynote with Dr. Gillette, we've got a special bonus keynote from INACSL and Carol Durham, because recently they just launched their latest version of their standards. I think it was, oh my gosh, 3, 4, 5 years ago, about 4 years ago, sitting on a flight with some of the other SimGHOSTS leadership. It was, I think, about a 12-hour flight, and we started supporting the organization by creating a SimTech specific or simulation technology operations specific standard, because they were previously numbered, and so we created a new one, which then kind of helped to launch the creation of support of those operating simulations. So the standards are absolutely crucial. They're the best way to provide information to higher levels of administration with regards to, if you want to take simulation seriously, these are the standards you need to uphold, and those have a direct relationship with regards to now our career paths here, and that's for both any of you that are full-time technical staff or full-time clinical educators who are also operating these technologies, to be able to get those administrators at different levels to understand what is it going to take for us to be successful. So with that being said, I'd like to bring Carol up here and hear from her about the new standards. So Carol?
So thank you, Lance, for a lovely introduction. I am privileged to be the past president of the International Nursing Association for Clinical Simulation and Learning, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a history about the standards, but wanted to just see how many people know about the standards and are using them already. So there's a handful of people in the room who have, and so this is to whet your appetite and give you an opportunity to those who have not had the opportunity to look at them, to examine them and think about integrating them into your program. That's fine. Yep. Okay, thanks. So these have been revised in 2016, and so I don't have any conflicts of interest or disclosures to give you. The objectives for this little bit of time is to just give you the resources that you might need for the INACSL standards of best practice, and also to identify strategies that you might take back and integrate into your programs, particularly around the design and creation of the work that you are doing, and then determine resources needed to operationalize the standards at your institution. There are a few key references here that I need for you to think about downloading. One is, of course, getting to the INACSL standards, and they are free download. They're PDFs that you can download, or if you choose to have a hard copy in your lab, you can purchase a hard copy from INACSL.org. I think it's $10 if you're a member, $15 if you're not. But again, you can download these freely, individually, and have them available for all of the people working in your labs. Many of you may already know about the Simulation Dictionary that was put together by multiple organizations, but sponsored by the Society for Simulation in Healthcare. And that is a great download to have as a resource, particularly as we're trying to use the same terminology. And if you're writing grants or actually trying to do things, using the same words really help. Or people say to you, what is the definition for a simulationist? Or what is the definition for embedded actor? This gives you a standard national reference to go to. Again, that is a free download. It was supported by ARC, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. Then the IPEC competencies, if you're doing any interprofessional, which I imagine all of you are, you do want to look at the IPEC competencies, which are looking at the guidelines for teaching interprofessionally, and they were revised in 2016. They were first done in 2011, so you go back to the original document and download it for free, and then the upgrade in 2016. Then the National Council of State Boards of Nursing had a Sentinel study. Many of you already know about that, but that was in 2014. And so that is also a free download, and this year after that, in 2015, they brought together leaders to talk about if people are going to start using 50% of simulation for their clinical experiences, they really need guidelines to do that, because we just don't want people to just go do it and it be all over the board. So the National Council then convened a group of people to look at what are the guidelines. Both in the study and in the guidelines, the INACSL standards are referenced as a way to develop quality simulations. And that's why SimGHOSTS has offered this opportunity for us to give you this information. And I want to say with a heartfelt gratitude to Lance for making an opportunity for this. Thank you, Lance. So we began work on the standards in 2009. They were first published in 2011, revised in 2013. They were vetted by organizations, so it's not just one organization's perspective. And I'm going to give you a quick glance of that list. Lance will have this slide deck to distribute to you after today. And then when this national study came out, lots of people were trying to figure out what are those standards and what do they mean to my practice. 2 standards were added in 2015 as well. The organizations that review the standards are Pediatric and also Nursing and Royal College of Physicians, Australia and British Columbia, and the International Council of Nursing. So you can see there's quite a few people who have laid their eyes on this and given us feedback about it. So we changed the formatting, we removed numbers because numbers implied hierarchy and terminology was one, and certainly that's not the most important thing that we do. So we think that it's better just to have names and people choose which one they enter first. And we changed it to a glossary since the dictionary came out. Makes a lot of sense not to have a terminology after that. And then of course it was updated with evidence. So here are the 2016 simulation guidelines. And if you want to start out and figure out where do I begin, read the simulation design one first. And after that, the others kind of unfold more about each one of those. And so outcomes and objectives, which we're all thinking about where we're going when we begin the simulation, and that's going to be how we're going to evaluate. So think about what are your outcomes and what are your objectives, and facilitation, debriefing, evaluation, professional integrity, SimIPE, and then the glossary. I'm going to talk briefly about that because I know you have a packed agenda, and I was given a small slot of time with gratitude. So the one I want to spend the most time on is actually the design one. And this is the reference for it, and the authors are identified in that. But simulation-based experiences are purposely designed so that you can identify the objectives and optimize the outcomes. You might remember that in 2015, the Institute of Medicine, which now is the National Academies of Medicine, issued a document that is a good download that talks about measuring outcomes of interprofessional education to impact patients. One of the things that I think is going to be a call for us soon is how do we measure simulation to impact patients? And the work that we've been doing for the Global Networking for Simulation in Healthcare, and there are others in the room, some of our vendors as well, I see Lynn in the back and Scott, have been working on this together to really look at that return on investment and value on investment for simulation. That we're not doing simulation just because it's the latest trend, but to really make a difference in patients. And so when you think about it, we really are all about the same thing. No matter if you're a physician, pharmacist, medicine, social work, we're looking at trying to improve quality of care. And so your work supports that ability to make an impact on the outcomes that happen with patients. So the thing that's really important, of course, is to examine the needs assessment. What is it that your organization is working on? And one of the things that is a really good way to examine that is also look at what are the pain points for the organizations that you serve. Are there metrics that are being not met? Or are there joint commission things that people are being cited for? And does there need to be a training around that so that we can improve those outcomes? So when we think about really making an impact on what simulation can do and become a value in an institution, we really do need to address the stakeholders and the impacts that they have, the things that impact their work, and that is important. Obviously, measurable objectives, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and the simulation is based upon purpose, theory, and modality. The scenario or context is really important. Fidelity is one of the things that we talk a lot about, and I actually think we made a misstep in the beginning of our talking about fidelity, because we talked about it about a mannequin, and we talk about high fidelity mannequins and low fidelity mannequins, when in actuality it is about the methodology. Does the methodology have fidelity? Is it realistic? Does it simulate the real experience? And so there's a lot of movement in the literature about talking about fidelity of the scenario and the scene, and that can be Online, tabletop, it can be a variety of simulations, not only about a mannequin. And so when you begin to think about using the word fidelity, think about it in a broader sense, not just about a piece of equipment that we have, but about the realism that we create around that scenario and that story. We'll talk a little bit about facilitation and briefing and debriefing and evaluation as well. So the INACSL standards of best practice, outcomes and objectives, we suggest that those be designed obviously with the target outcomes in mind, but the thing that I think is important is to use some sort of methodology about your objectives, and the one that we're talking about is the SMART objectives. You can Google that and find out a whole lot more about the SMART objectives, but basically, are they measurable? Are they specific enough, achievable, realistic, and time-phased? And in that is also, are they leveled for the right type of learner that you have? So that really helps to target your work. Facilitation. We know that you may be an outstanding and fill in the blank. In my world, you might be an outstanding nurse. And you are a great bedside nurse, and then all of a sudden we move you to being a nurse manager without any additional training, and then we move you to a nurse educator, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in the sim lab. And we're turning around and relying on the sim techs to say, what do I do? Because we haven't had the training. So now we know that we need to do faculty development, no matter what profession you're in, around development and training of how to do facilitation. I have seen, and I'm sure you have seen, a wide variety of quality simulations done and simulations that might not have been as high quality as you might have desired. And one of the things that's really heartbreaking is when you see a facilitator in there turning the sim lab all of a sudden into a lecture. And so then why do we book sim time, sim resources to really conduct a lecture with a group of, and enter the number, 4, 8, 12. That doesn't make any sense, doesn't it? So we see that, so we need to move facilitators to the ability to facilitate, to be able to be that person who's asking questions, nudging, guiding, but not stepping up to teach. And the first time that you step up to start in a lecture mode, your learners will turn to you for the information. And so you've shut down this collaborative, learner-focused learning. So think about that, and this facilitation gives you some guidelines about how to do that. Looking at particularly the methodology of how do you facilitate, and assuming the responsibility and oversight of the whole experience, from development to implementation to evaluation and refinement of it. And that's a continuum. I do a lot of interprofessional simulations, and when we're developing those, we're with medicine and pharmacy right now, and they are at the table for the design, the implementation, and the evaluation. So when we're facilitating, they're present. So it's not like one of us will take it and do it, because then the learners who are in that room who don't see someone like them are not able to translate what they're learning as readily. Because obviously I do not know the full depth and breadth of the work of a pharmacist or a physician, but I know more about nursing, and I can bring that to the table. So you want to approach this for level learning with the experience of the learners, and sometimes people feel like the preparatory activities are important, and that depends upon what is your outcome, and also the level. When we start our simulations, we have preparatory information, but as we move through the semester and get towards the end, we try to simulate having arrived on a unit and going to be taking care of multiple patients. So there's not as much preparatory as there is in the beginning, where we're trying to learn to teach them how to care for patients. So it depends upon what you're trying to accomplish. And then you have to determine, are you going to deliver cues, and how are they going to be delivered? And I bet if we asked, there probably would be at least 25 different ways that you deliver cues. But some of the clever ways to do it is let it come from a family member, the patient themselves. You might rotate in the room as another professional, like a attending or a charge nurse. So you can bring cues without stopping and becoming the teacher. Once you do that, remember, you've become teacher-focused. And then debriefing gets a lot of press because it's harder than we think. And so there's a lot of work out there about debriefing. And so I would ask you to continue reading, because it's ever evolving. And the standard about it talks about using a planned debriefing. There's debate about, does the debriefing need to be as long as the sim, or twice as long as the sim, or what is the magic number? no one's determined what's the magic number at this point. It kind of is about what you need to accomplish in that debriefing. One of the challenges that I think we have is we feel like debriefing is the most important piece, and it is, but if you don't have a well-designed simulation, you don't have a great springboard from which to do the debriefing. So the debriefing, the simulation has to be done quite well to have quality debriefing. So all of it's important. But the other piece of it is you can't debrief everything that you see. So you have to make notes and decisions about what are you going to debrief in the simulation. Obviously, you're debriefing the things that point to your objectives and your outcomes. And that's your blueprint, if you imagine. And then anything that is an error or something that is aberrant that you need to correct before the people leave the room. So those are the things that you have to do. And Lance set us up here. I've not ever looked at that video from this point of view until today, but wouldn't that be a great way to teach about debriefing? Or facilitation, because that instructor was exasperated and lost. And so if we would use that to say, if you've ever been in that situation and you lost your learners, or how do I deal with that? So that's a great way to maybe use as a training for facilitation, because facilitation was not happening in that clip. So thanks for that new vision. And then we know that we have to be thinking about how we're going to debrief it and what methodology we're going to use. It has to be done, debriefing has to be facilitated, and that's again not teaching, but facilitated by someone who has seen the sim, and who has been trained in debriefing, and who has the ability to call out of the learner what they were thinking. So I've been trained in the debriefing with good judgment from the Cambridge group, Center for Medical Simulation. There are many methodologies out there. Choose the one that you like. I think it probably makes sense in your institution with a particular group of learners to use one that they can get familiar with and understand how to respond to. But you may find in your situation it depends upon the learners who came in, and some types work better with others. But having them congruent with your outcomes and objective is good. And this is just 3, but there's many more. Debriefing for Meaningful Learning, that's Chris Dreyfus's work. Debriefing with Good Judgment, Jenny Rudolph and Dan Raymer, and that group did that. Plus Delta is how we started out. That began in the industries before us, aviation, nuclear medicine. And so those are the ones that you can still use. They still work, but they don't get down to the depth of what you were thinking. So you might blend these. You might start out with a plus delta and then move to others. So there are references in the slide deck for those, and also on the INACSL standard of debriefing, it has a whole list of debriefing references. So if you're still learning and wanting to know more, go there and use that as your reading summer reading list. Participant evaluation, we don't really need to know any more about are they satisfied and feel like this really works for them. We need to know more about how does it change practice. And so that's kind of how the evaluations really need to do. We often, when we think, oh, I've got a great idea, I need to develop an instrument, go find an instrument so that you can have psychometrics that work with it instead of having an instrument that's not been vetted for reliability. And so that would be important. And there are not only some in this reference list, but also on the interprofessional education, the Nexus, the national standard, the National Center for Interprofessional Education, they have a whole area for measurement and outcomes. So go there if you're doing something interprofessionally for tools that really work. We use the Mayo tool for our IPE because we're focusing on teamwork, collaboration, and communication. And that tool really looks at team step skills, and that is what we need for our outcomes, as an example. So choose the tool to fit your outcomes. Don't go recreate the wheel. Add to the literature about the tool. The criteria is this method of evaluating not only the student's experience, but also the simulation and the work of the faculty. And that becomes a little bit uncomfortable when we start evaluating ourselves about how well did I facilitate, how well did I debrief. But if we're about teaching and learning, we need to be on the continuum of ever improving our own practice. So think about that, about evaluating yourselves. professional integrity, simulation allows us to see what really is happening for a learner. You get to see how do they treat patients, how do they dress, how do they approach things. You'll uncover things that people have not yet seen in clinical practice and be able to address those for professional integrity and the things that we want our learners to be out there. And that simulation is a window into that behavior. People say, oh, I would not have done that in real life. But there's literature that says if they did it in sim, they do it in real life. So we can't stand on, I wouldn't do it in real life because this is just pretend. And you're going, no, there is literature that does support that what you do here is what you do in practice. So I've now done something funky, Lance, about I got it, okay. Foster and role model the attributes that you want in your professional learners. So that means that you treat them with respect. You treat them as people who have a lot of intellect and who are trying to do the right thing. And so with that, you are then calling that out of them as a learner so that they can actually do that. You want to create a safe learning environment. This is another place that I think we're struggling in the literature that we have. We talk about psychologically safe places, and sometimes our learners think that means that you don't correct me. But in actuality, psychologically safe means I correct you because I'm obligated to help you become the best professional you want to be. And I share my expertise with you to help you move along that continuum. And so because this is difficult, doesn't mean that it's not safe. Safe means I'm respectful, I'm kind in the way that I deliver this, and I also am not deeming them and failing them out of a program for one event. So rethink about psychologically safe and continue to watch the literature about the way that that evolves. We know that requiring confidentiality and keeping that confidential about what happens is important because one, you're protecting your scenario so that you can use it over and over. And another is you're protecting the professional identity and regard for each other without going, geez, this person is terrible, how can they ever be a nurse or a physician? When in fact they're in the learning mode, right? We're there so that mistakes can be revealed. And then the IPE really is talking about having different professions come together. I can't emphasize enough the importance of having the professions at the table that you're working with. That you can't design a realistic dietitian simulation without that brain at the table, because you're making assumptions about what you know, and you need that to be present when you're making the linkages for your objectives and your outcome. You need to have a theoretical framework. I think the IPEC competencies are great. They're nationally recognized. They're already got objectives there and outcomes, so don't recreate the wheel. Use what is nationally recognized. And then the glossary is just that. The words that we use in the standards are in a glossary so that you can actually get to them. And again, I'm pointing you to the dictionary for a more complete dictionary type reference that was done by many organizations. Maya Angelou says, I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. How can they? We spent so much time in it, right? But they will never forget how you made them feel. So that's part of our job, is to make them feel like they're learning and that they can be that profession that they dream to be. And we are helping them on that journey. And the journey is theirs, but we're bringing our expertise to bear. So in order to do this simulation for 50% that our boards of nursing said that we can do, you do have to have not only preparation of the faculty, but the program has to have been invested and have the resources to do it. They have to be mapped. You have to include IPE. You have to sometimes use in situ and designated personnel. Initially, we were thinking, well, everybody needs to be trained on simulation on our faculty. Not everybody's good at doing simulation, right? As not everybody's good at lecturing. Not everybody's good at clinical supervision. So we need to use the skill sets that are best and train a core group of faculty. And look at the design and use SMART objectives. Always have somebody look at it with you, a peer review, an evaluation and iterative reliability of each semester. Any questions? I was asked to give you a snapshot of the standards so that you could go and review them more deeply. We are having our first international conference in Toronto next June. You're all invited if you would like, and you can go to our website and register. But I do would like for you to think about, those of you who have not, using the standards to integrate them into your work so that you actually can bring up the level of the quality of your simulations to a standard that is recognized around the world.
Joe, you had a question?
I was just wondering about, are you going to be around the conference?
I'm going to be here all day.
Okay.
So if anybody wants to talk to me or ask me other questions, I would love to have a conversation with you. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, Carol. A round of applause for you.
Thank you.